Well, joining us now is Chris Hodges, who is the chair of the independent governing body of the compensation scheme for post office owners impacted by the scandal. Thanks so much for coming on, Chris. Is it enough, frankly, for the government to essentially just pardon everybody who's been wrongly accused of fraud and theft? Would that essentially help all of these people waiting for compensation essentially get it?
I think these things usually have to be dealt with in sequence, unfortunately, because of the way the legal system works. The first issue is to investigate all the facts. The inquiry is doing that very carefully, but it takes a considerable time, and we have quite a few more months. But it is perfectly clear from the evidence in the inquiry that there are a number of really serious issues that the Post Office and Fujitsu have to answer. The second issue is, can you overturn the convictions? The third one is, can you give compensation? And the fourth one is, what about accountability, which is the point you've just been talking about with the police and various regulatory authorities like the Solicitors Regulatory Authority and fraud, etc. As far as, my advisory board was created relatively recently and includes Lord Arbuthnot and Kevin Jones MP, who've been distinguished in their campaigning on behalf of the postmasters and mistresses, and also Professor Richard Moorhead of Exeter University. I'm retired Professor of Justice Systems at Oxford University, and we have been asked to oversee the three compensation schemes that are currently the main ones that exist in this space. It very quickly became clear that one of the compensation schemes has been in place for a while and is almost completed. There are over 2,000 of perhaps 2,500 roughly people who would be eligible who have already been paid. They were not convicted. There is another scheme called the GLO scheme, which is run and created by the Department for Business and Trade relatively recently, and that is up and running and the wheels are turning, and it should process the claims roughly by this summer. Some of them are going through very quickly, some take time because they're complicated. However, it became clear to us that the real problem rests with the 700 and maybe more individuals who cannot get their convictions overturned, and therefore they're not eligible for any compensation. And these are the people who are clearly the most deserving. They've been treated appallingly by the state and state bodies. The Post Office was enabled to bring private prosecutions. It's perfectly clear that the behaviour of people involved in that generically was extremely bad. And we have looked, as I say, two professors of law in particular, have looked at the criminal appeal system in order to see if there could be ways to speed things up in getting the appeals overturned. You get a hint about this because there are perhaps 700, maybe more, as I say, but only 93 so far have been overturned, whereas actually 50 or so have not been overturned, but they have been considered by the Court of Appeal. And we think that quite a number of those should have been overturned, but this is not necessarily a criticism of the judges. They didn't necessarily have all the facts in front of them because they haven't necessarily been found yet by the inquiry. You could do quite a number of changes to the appeals mechanism, and I think you should do that, and we should do that generically anyway. But the trouble is, it does appear to us, because of a whole number of different technical legal problems and the fact that there are different categories of situation within which the postmasters and postmistresses find themselves. So you can't talk about them all on a blanket basis at the moment, is the way the system currently stands. And therefore the answer, as we said in December, is to cut through the Gordian knot and say there should be a simple act of Parliament that effectively overturns everything. Now, the wording of that, there are a number of options about how you do it. The wording of that needs to be careful because there are issues as between the Court of Appeal maintaining its constitutional position in overturning the appeals. But basically, that is what we are talking about at the moment. And that's what's being picked up in the media this weekend.
Chris, I mean, the essence of the charge against the Post Office and it's pretty blatant, is this. You know, you've got 736 sub-post offices, you know, mistresses and masters accused of the same crime, embezzling large amounts of money from the post office, all of them saying it couldn't have been us, it must have been the computer. Every single one of them. And the post office go, no, 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 the computer's right, you're all wrong. So that is why the then Chief Executive, Paula Venables, is on the rack. We have to be careful here. She deserves her day, and we don't know the truth of it. I mean, I would imagine what she's going to say is, well, I didn't know. I didn't know that the computer wasn't working. But more to the point, the then Post Office Minister, Sir Ed Davey, Lib Dem, refused to meet Alan Bates, as in the Mr. Bates versus the Post Office, the title of the ITV drama. He refused to meet him on the basis that a meeting with this guy complaining about the Horizon system and the predicament of all his fellow sub-postmasters would not serve any purpose. Sir Ed Davey says that he too was misinformed by the post office. That may or may not be true, but he deserves to be looked at as well, doesn't he?
Well, you should ask Sir Ed that question, not me. I'm responsible for giving advice to the government on the operation of the compensation schemes. It is perfectly clear, you are right, that the behaviour of the post office in denying that there were problems and saying to people, oh, just someone needs to own up and it'll all be fine. And in some cases, you will get your post office back, which were just blatant lies. And quite a number of individuals were terrorised, basically, and extremely afraid. They were afraid of going to prison, so therefore they pleaded guilty to a lesser charge. And there was a sort of deliberate manipulation of plea bargaining, in effect, by some involved here. One wouldn't want to say all. And indeed, the situation is more complicated because the rules and the bodies involved in Scotland and Northern Ireland are different. And then maybe another 200 people there who were prosecuted on post office evidence. So the overall position is actually quite complex. And it's very difficult to generalize, which is why we said that there needs to be a simple solution to overturning all the convictions, which is an act of parliament that effectively achieves that aim. Now, the detail of that, there are a number of options. So I don't want to speculate in what is being discussed in the Ministry of Justice
Chris,
this afternoon.
Sorry to interrupt, but in principle, you support the idea of a wholesale exoneration of the 736 people that were, I think, unfairly prosecuted.
Yes, that's what we said publicly in December, before the TV programmes, in fact.
Totally agree.
It seems to me, Chris, that the taxpayer is the one who's carrying the can as well for this, and a lot of the money that's going to be spent on the inquiry on compensation is coming out of the public purse. At what point are Fujitsu being asked to put their hands in their pockets, considering they have scored government contracts since the Horizon scandal and continue to be the software that the Post Office is using?
Well, I think this will come out in the wash, and it goes back to the point I made at the beginning about things have to be done in a particular sequence. I wouldn't mind betting, but I don't know, that there has already been a discussion between the government and Fujitsu. And after the public inquiry has been completed, and after all the compensation bill and all the costs are known, there will be a fairly robust conversation between the government and Fujitsu to say, OK, what are you paying? Otherwise, it's going to go back to court. So all these issues and issues about accountability and individuals within the post office management or at a low level in the organisation, all these issues will arise in due course. They're the right questions, but they will arise in the good time. What we're saying is that time needs to move on jolly quickly because we need to overturn the convictions. It would be great if the public inquiry could go quicker than it is doing, but it can't. It needs to take a very detailed, careful examination of all the evidence in order to get everything on the table as to exactly what happened. And it's been doing a very good job in in revealing a great deal of bad practice.
Chris Hodges, Chair of the Independent Governing Body of Compensation Scheme for Post Office Owners. Thank you so much for your time. Great to talk to you.